The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. Stefan here with XR Intelligence by Reuters Events, and welcome to our long-awaited webinar. Don't you get it yet? Getting non-users to use XR and see the benefit. So without further ado, let me hand over to Bob Fine, Executive Director of the International Virtual Reality and Healthcare Association, who'll be moderating this session. Just a quick heads up, our webinars have been pretty popular recently with a lot of people on lockdown, so there may be a bit of a rush to get in. Rest assured that this session will be recorded, and everybody registering will be sent the recording. So that's that really. Yeah. So I'll hand over now to Bob Fine, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Bob.
Well, Stefan, thanks very much for the introduction and having me back. Always enjoy doing these events with XR Intelligence. So we're going to just get right into it. We've got a lot of material to cover, and I expect a good number of questions as usual. And we're going to go left to right from the photos for introductions. So please, take a couple minutes, provide your background and your focus regarding XR at your organization. Earl?
Yeah, so my name is Earl Cison, and I'm from Thermo Fisher Scientific. In terms of our company, we are the world leader in serving science. Our mission is to enable our customers to make the world healthier, cleaner, and safer. So just to give you an idea of the company, in terms of our products and services, we are one of the companies helping the coronavirus efforts in, supplying test kits, supporting some other pharma companies and vaccine developers. So that's sort of the short version of what our company is. In terms of XR, I'm a senior designer in digital VR and AR development. I am a team of one. And what I do is I really help business units within our company, create VR and AR experiences from start to finish. So in terms of my use case, it's specifically for marketing at trade shows and events, and we'll see how that goes from this time on. But basically, I've been creating a lot of VR, AR to bring people to booths, show them our products and services. They're educational based and have a lot of those things, but they also have a wow factor to it. So I really try to influence businesses to take advantage of the VR XR technology and the best way to use it. So that's pretty much how I've been in the VR XR space.
Great, Earl. Thank you. Mike?
Hi, hey guys. My name is Mike Demogin. I'm the SVP of Partnerships and Publishing for the gaming company Survios. We really focus on creating content, gaming content, for both the retail market and the location-based entertainment market. Couple big titles that we've created was Raw Data back in 2016, which was actually the #1 game over all PC and VR on Steam. And we have also created Creed Rise to Glory, a boxing game which has been a continuous top seller on PlayStation for the last 2 years running. For us, XR is a way of life. It's just in terms of the extent of bringing the stories that we want to bring to the table. So, and we believe that VR especially is one of the great ways to tell stories, since you are completely immersed, where, for example, in our game Raw Data, you can actually physically dodge a bullet by ducking or hiding behind virtual physicality versus instead of just pushing a button in regular gaming. So that's kind of what we bring to the table. And again, our job is to bring VR to the masses.
Thanks, Mike. Rafi?
Hi, everyone. I'm a multidisciplined visual storyteller and creative media executive. Been in the entertainment and technology sectors for 20-something years now. In my previous role as VP Creative for Immersive Entertainment at NBC Universal, I led creative innovation, narrative design, and visual development across traditional and emerging media with a focus on animation, XR, real-time, and virtual production. In parallel to this sort of executive trajectory, I am also an independent animator, illustrator, and character designer, very much on the festival circuit. But today, I sort of leverage this combined experience and my passion for XR and animation to transform the origination, production, and distribution of content to be more democratized, artist-friendly, nimble, collaborative, and efficient. And I do this with multiple sectors and multiple industries, from anyone who's in the content creation space, from ad agencies to law firms to media companies and technology firms who value the creation of content. And with XR and real-time tech, there's a real opportunity to bring together these multiple formats under one sort of a creative workflow, and that's the sort of thing that that's the sort of digital change I work with when I work with these companies.
Rafi, thank you. And last but not least, Terry Schussler.
Hi, everybody. So I'm the Senior Director of Spatial Computing at Deutsche Telekom. I work both in the US and Germany, although right now, of course, just in the US. I work within the 5G group at Deutsche Telekom, and I focus a lot on researching and creating spatial computing solutions that leverage the value of 5G and edge computing services. I do a lot of work collaborating with the makers of head-worn devices and companies that are building enabling technologies so that we can create a future which is not a heads-down society of people walking down the street with mobile phones in their hands, but a heads-up society wearing head-worn devices and fully engaged in pervasive and personalized XR or immersive experiences. I've created somewhere over 200 software products in my career, and my general focus as a software innovator has been to make software smarter for users while enabling new forms of communication through new technical capabilities. So I'm really focused a lot now on, bringing a wider group of people into the use of XR. And in fact, one of my big projects, which we launched last week, was a publication called the Global Resource Guide to XR Collaboration, which is available at xrcollaboration.com, and it's just a free 60-page downloadable PDF that really tries to explain to non-technical people how XR as a collaboration platform can have a lot of value, especially now.
Terry, well, thanks, and that's a great segue. So just to reiterate, our focus today in this discussion is to try to, share with the audience each of your own experiences with promoting and getting, non-users both internally and externally to your organizations to both use XR and to understand the benefits, whether it's from a production standpoint or ROI standpoint or both. So, Earl, let's start with you. You shared a lot on our prep call about how you were using it internally and bringing in other departments.
Yeah, so it kind of works in different ways where, a lot of businesses are interested into, trying XR in terms of VR or AR. And basically I consult with them in terms of, creating the best experience, and it could be AR or VR. So one of the use cases would be an example of an instrument. How do you show an instrument in VR or AR? And the benefits of that would be, at trade shows and events, if they're shipping instruments, it saves a lot of costs in terms of that. It's very expensive, and a lot of these instruments where they are shipped, at the trade show, they're really shells. Some of them don't work just because you can't put real samples in there. And in the VR aspect, they could actually play around with the instruments, go through workflow. And the one thing I try to do is also give it a little bit of a wow factor, something that's a little bit more interesting, but also educational. So a lot of our, businesses are looking into that and they're seeing the value of it. The other side of it with other teams within our company are really using it for training. And that's been a very big use case in our case where, for example, we just got a whole shipment of HoloLenses at our Greensboro, North Carolina site where they're using it to, train in areas where they can't be, or it takes a while for them to get used to these environments. Some of them are very labor intensive, and with this AR HoloLens, they could actually go through workflows and processes and stuff like that. So those are the primary use cases where we've been using XR as a company.
Earl, that's great. And I remember in our discussion the other day, you talked about one of the great training use cases, especially in healthcare today, was sterilization. And I was having a conversation with a company a couple of weeks ago that's focused on that from a VR training standpoint, and that it's quite a complicated procedure to train and can take quite a bit of time. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how VR training has helped in that particular use case?
Yeah, in that case, it's basically in a lot of the environments that we have are sterile. There's environments where, it may take them a long time, maybe up to a year, to really feel comfortable and move around in those type of spaces. And then the other thing is, a lot of the times when they're training, they're using real products. And if they make mistakes, it could cost a lot of money in terms of that. So what that really does, it helps them in terms of, learning the processes, the workflows, and they can make mistakes. It's a learning process in terms of that. So it minimizes the mistakes when they actually get into the real environment. So it's a work in progress, and like I mentioned, some other teams are really working in that space. So it's been a benefit in terms of the growth, mostly within our company, that training in those type of environments.
Earl, thanks. Mike, you had said something the other day which I thought was extremely valuable and something I hadn't actually thought about too much myself. And I think if companies spent more time from this aspect, it could really, help grow the usage. But distribute that growth.
Sure. A lot of times, whenever you talk to people who aren't really involved in the technology, VR, and I'm only going to focus really on VR because that's my expertise, it's very gimmicky. Oh, that's that cool technology. That sounds cool. They don't really understand the magic of this technology until you have to bring it to them. So some of the things that what we do at Survios is that and part of my job is for partnerships, when we get introduced, we will actually bring our technology, our games and everything over to the company in question, and from there we'll let people try it out. We'll be there for the entire day, from people trying out the games, again talking a little bit more about the technology, so that our person that we're working with, they have more of a groundswell of support, because really at the end of the day, you don't really understand the magic of VR, and I think the rest of my panelists will agree, until you actually try it out. Most people say, "Oh, I've tried mobile VR, which is cool," but you don't really understand the magic of it until you get into the premium, which is run by HoloLens, Oculus, and all these other companies and everything. So again, a lot of it is just trial and bringing it to them rather than waiting for people to come to us.
Yeah, if I could pipe in on that, that's been a passion point of mine for 2 years, as I bring brand new devices, prototype devices from head-worn makers into executive briefings. And it's super important to show leadership what good looks like, and actually make them try the devices out. And it's it's an interesting sort of psychological thing, because you have very high level execs who are like, oh, I've seen that already, I know what that's about, but they've never actually put it on their head. They just seen a video or saw a graphic on a website or something. So you literally have to make them wear the device and try out the experience to really understand it. We have to remember that 99.999% of the planet haven't tried these things yet, so they're still learning. And so demonstration is really important. But the other key part of that is, if you've got 15, 20 people in a room and one person's trying out your VR experience, the other 19 people need to be able to see it. So spectator view and showing people what the other person is experiencing is super, super important to that, because that's how you communicate the concept to everybody.
Absolutely. The other thing that the worst two words for us whenever we demo is, hey, would you like to try it out? And then they say, I'm good. And it's like, oh, you're not. We really, really stress on trial and spectator. Absolutely.
Mike, in terms of creating those evangelists at other organizations, have you had an experience yet where anyone has not seen the value or interest in it as a medium?
We have, and there we have to understand what their pain points are or what they're not understanding. And sometimes it's going to be directly questioning them, or it's going to be through our contact a roundabout way. But again, we are pretty sensitive. I mean, one of the things that our company really focuses on is, quote unquote, reading the room and understanding that, and then from there following up how to address all those things. Again, it could be costs, it could be I didn't get to see the spectator mode. Do I feel like an idiot by acting, moving around? There's a lot of different things. We just need to pinpoint what their pain point is.
Got it. Thank you. Rafi, you had shared with us a 3-step process that you've kind of developed internally and started implementing. You want to share that with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it kind of builds on what the rest of the panelists have been talking about. Show don't tell is the old adage, but as we've been saying with XR, experiencing it is paramount. And while it's great to demonstrate what's out there as an initial step in terms of introducing the people to something that they haven't, to XR that they haven't experienced before, really the first step is to educate and demonstrate the power of this medium with relevant use cases. So it's not, I found that it's not enough to sort of show someone the top 10 or the top 5 Oculus and Vive experiences. Beat Saber is fun, but I found that if it doesn't relate very closely to the use case for an organization, they just see it as something that, oh, that's something another business in another sector does. That's not something we can do. And they'll lump the whole medium and technology with the execution or the product, right? So I found that the first step is educating with use cases that speak to the daily operation of the business. So if I'm working with a studio, taking one of their processes and showing them how a XR native workflow can either give them efficiencies or open up the accessibility of 3D content creation to other members of their group that previously could not. So that's a particular way of showing relevant use cases. And step 2 is to implement. So once they've been educated with relevant use cases, then they're on board and they get, okay, there's something interesting here with XR. It's only when you start implementing and upskilling key roles in those teams that you start to move the needle in the perceived value of XR. And this is the sort of feedback and firsthand experiences I get when I work with ad agencies and experiential companies, and of course the studios I've worked at before. And once you've upskilled, then you have several ambassadors for the medium, but you still haven't really got senior buy-in. And when you get that through the 3rd step, which is building a proof of concept that targets an existing pain point or unlocks a capability that demonstrates the ability to scale, that's when I found you actually get buy-in from senior management, the decisions. And I've seen this across production and marketing, but also across commercial strategy and training as well, and HR.
Rafi, thanks. So just to review, three-step process: educate, implement, and then proof of concept, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Terry, you're a very big proponent, and I am as well with you, on remote collaboration perhaps being the killer app, especially in this current time. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. We're all, here we are using GoToWebinar. The word Zoom is, it's like become Xerox and Kleenex, and in many ways as a verb. We're all struggling to either learn or work from home or just communicate with our friends and family. And a lot of the video conferencing tools that are out there are very capable for those purposes. But they're also not capable enough for a lot of the transition that has to occur from real world interaction to doing it from a remote location. And this is where I was really focusing on utilizing XR technologies as a platform for, enabling, real interaction between people. And so at DT, we've been sort of focusing this idea of digital social proximity. So the idea that we want to allow people to have this sense of social proximity that they're not having in the real world, utilizing digital technologies. And remote collaboration is like the best example of doing this. I mean, in the past, we've seen people doing, social VR chat, with avatar kind of experiences and Second Life and Altspace. But now we actually have to do things together besides just, throw emoticons at each other and high five. We need to actually interact with content. We need to review media together. We need to share ideas. And so this is where immersing yourself in a VR context where you don't have distractions of the real world actually increases your focus and attention, and provides this sort of, otherworldly opportunity to feel like you're collaborating in the same business room together. And so there's actually almost 100 different software products that focus on delivering this type of solution. And that was one of the things that we were doing in putting this publication together. Is also at the end of April, we're going to have an interactive tool, completely unbiased, that will allow a user to go in and say, I want to do this kind of an event or meeting. These are the features that I need, and then we'll give you a short list of tools that meet those requirements. Because it's really hard. There's a lot of complexities to these tools, and there's a lot of differentiation in terms of what they're designed for. Some are designed for design review in automotive industry purposes, and some are much more general purpose and designed for business meetings and sales events. So we are still learning now what people are going to need. But the one thing I'm finding is we are going to quickly move away from the sort of cartoony character representation that we're used to for our avatars, the sort of Nintendo Wii style look, to a much more photorealistic look. And this desire to be able to express body language and sort of emotion through our presence in an avatar is going to become more and more important. And so showing people what that can look like and how good that can be is an important step to getting engagement, especially from senior executives in large companies who, when they're having a business meeting, they don't want to look like a Bugs Bunny or a robot. They want to look like themselves, and they want to have their physical presence to feel in a spatial context similar to their real world physical presence. So this is an important transition that these tools are going through right now.
Terry, great, thank you. Now have a number of questions coming in. I'm going to try and start fielding those. And actually, Johan has a great one, which I struggle with myself. And he says the terms VR, XR, and LBVR are loosely thrown around. What's your definition of XR? And let's start with you, Earl.
That's an interesting one because XR in my mind is the the total package of, let's say, augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, and stuff like that. In our company, for example, people still don't really gravitate and understand what XR is. So we've been just using VR and AR just to really show people I believe Rafi was talking about the education and learning type process, and I think that's important in the sense of just making them understand what VR is first, then maybe AR, and then understanding that XR is the compilation of everything. So the way I look at it, it's a full portfolio of these different types of technologies in terms of virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality type of things. So that's sort of my point of view in terms of it. I do want to touch on something before that, Terry was saying, and Rafi was talking about showing relevant content and spectator viewing. At trade shows and events, that was really important in terms of getting people in. We usually had a 40-inch monitor, 60-inch monitor there for people to walk by and see it. So that was a great thing in bringing people in. But the relevant content is important. When I was showing VR early in 2016, I was just finding, there are different types of VR available that were science-based. So just to get their minds thinking, this is science in terms of our industry, that helps out. So my one tip would be, if you're getting started, is really finding one of those relevant content to your industry or whatever it is. So, yeah, that's my opinion on things.
Earl, thanks. Rafi, I've got a follow-up question to you about your process from Fregiz. And he wanted you to kind of elaborate more on step 2, implement, and I'll read out his question. Is that something you do as part of your pitch to the company with the help of other company employees, or do you do that internally with your staff and then it becomes the proof of concept?
For the implementation, it depends on the organization and what kind of guidance and consultancy they want. Some of them just want sort of direction and top line strategy, and with some advice on which vendors or which products to buy and to bring into their workflow, and sort of set that up for them, either a strategy or a workflow sort of plan. And other organizations want hands-on guidance, demonstration. And for those, because it's spatial design that I focus on, quite often it's looking at the challenge that they have and going away and coming up with a solution, a sort of a very rough and ready solution that we then workshop together with further insight for them. So we start off with something tangible that sort of gets halfway there, and then they see it in action. And then you get the feedback loop then starts, and then you refine the solution with them. So it depends. Sometimes it's top-line guidance. Other times it's demonstrating it with spatial design tools that are on the market. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, very helpful. I want to answer this question for Philip, and Terry just provided me the website. Philip wanted to know about the VR meeting tool and when that'll be available, and I think you said end of April. And the collaboration document is available now, and that can be found at xrcollaboration.com. Just simply XR, then the word collaboration.com. So Philip, thank you for that. This is a really good one from Steve, and I know assessment is a very kind of early process in this aspect, but do any of you have KPIs you've been using internally to measure training effectiveness with VR?
Yes. So I did a project in 2016. It was the first thing I did when I came to Deutsche Telekom. It was a hybrid 2D and VR, a mobile VR application using the Gear VR or Samsung Gear VR platform to teach German language and culture to Syrian refugees. So we had about 1.25 million Syrian refugees housed in government buildings in Germany, and they were disconnected from German society. And so we wanted to teach them fundamental words and phrases that they needed to be able to interact with administrators in the camp to, ask for supplies or to get directions or assistance on things. And so we broke down their needs into 20 courses. And the first one, for example, was greeting people and making a request. And so, the language learning was done traditional 2D sort of gamified kind of interaction. And then once they were able to learn that, then they went into a VR experience where they would interact with avatars and that represented the administrator of the camp and go through a gamified dialogue role-playing experience. And so we did a lot of weekly design review with actual refugees in Germany before we released the product, but then we did a lot of efficaciousness testing, kind of looking to see how well they actually retain language knowledge after a period of time of interacting. And we do contrast to compare against traditional tools that were out there, Duolingo and things like that. And we found a significant 45% improvement in language efficaciousness as well as retention. So that was a important sort of contrast to compare metric that we did. And a lot of it came from the comfort that they got in VR, role-playing, sort of non-confrontational and very focused sort of experience where they weren't distracted with the noise of the other people around them in the real world. They were totally in the VR experience with headphones on, so they weren't physically distracted in a very dense camp environment.
Terry, thanks. Great question coming from Sebastian. There are a plethora of AR SDKs and AR cloud offerings out there and growing. What tool stacks and SDKs do each of your own teams use for building XR type products? Earl?
Yeah, so, in terms of what I do is I do use outside vendors, and a lot of them are using the AR kits, Apple AR kits, and the Google-based one. I can't remember that one is. So, but that's basically it. They're not using anything too complicated in terms of that. So I don't offhand remember what they are, but I do depend on the vendors to choose the right AR application, and that's one of those things I could look up for you of which ones I use within my.
Okay, great. Mike Roffey or Terry, do you want to comment on that one?
Sure. I'll just say, commonly a lot of the developers use Unity, leverage AR Foundation because it isolates them from a lot of the implementation layers with different devices and platforms. But we're also always pushing the envelope. So we're, recently I dug deep into a lot of the spatial mapping SDKs. Still trying to push the envelope in terms of real-time mapping. I was using 6D.ai until they just got acquired by Niantic to do cutting-edge real-time spatial mapping. We worked with a company called 1000 Realities out of Poland to do really simple camera-based stuff. So even low-end AR devices with camera can do very high-end spatial mapping and localization work. There's quite a bit of tools out there, and it's tough. You have to kind of look at the use case requirements and then kind of narrow down, which is why we were building this tool for collaboration, tool references. There's so many tools in order to pick your way through, and we have to kind of guide you through a Q&A of what your needs are and what the tools can actually do, kind of, match them up.
Just to pick up on Terry's point there, totally agree with the knowing your use case. It's also really important to know your audience. This is really important for the processes I tend to go with, because most of the people I speak to don't come from a traditional tech background. There's no programming experience or very little familiarity with game engines. Most of the people I speak to are creatives, designers, visual storytellers, execs with a lot of management and strategic experience and media experience, but they don't. This whole area is very new to them. So the tools I tend to introduce them to, and I use myself to develop and visualize XR experiences, tend to be very creator and artist centric. So, for example, if I am designing a spatial experience, whether it's AR or visualizing an event or creating a VR prototype, I would use an application called Tvori, Tvori. It's a small startup that's been going for 2-3 years, and there are several designer-centric apps out there in the Oculus Store and the Vive Store and Steam and all that. But this is one that is very playful and very accessible to all skill levels, which is why it resonates a lot with most of the people I speak to. It lowers the barrier for entry. So that's a good one to check out if you're planning an AR or VR experience, be it interactive or linear narrative. Likewise, if you are sculpting detailed models for a presentation, or if you're visualizing sort of three-dimensional forms, Adobe has Medium, and there's also something called Masterpiece VR on the market. These are very intuitive, easy-to-use apps that get quick, high-detailed results for most people. And on the AR specific side, yes, Reality Kit and Spark AR are fairly accessible, but very quickly you have to fall into code. But there are some really interesting apps coming up that don't need any coding knowledge, stuff like Wireframe, which is a one-man band studio. It's a completely web-based interface for prototyping AR experiences. And what's cool about that is you select from drop-down menus a bunch of presets of typical AR actions with no coding involved. And while it's not as good as prototyping spatially in VR, because you want to really design for the spatial medium using a spatial UI, but it's a very easy way for people to enter that space without learning a full-on game engine. So I would check that out, and I would also check out Adobe Aero, which is again another designer-friendly way of entering this space. Of course, the more complex your app ends up needing to be, then you need to start going into game engines. But you can get really far with tools like Oculus Quill, Tvori, Masterpiece VR, Medium, Wireframe, Spark AR, and Reality Kit.
Rafi, thanks. This is a really great question from Peter, and I'm going to start with my own opinion. What tools are missing to really drive XR creation and adoption forward? Just first, before we get to the rest of you, my personal feeling on that is, the Quest is a great headset. It's been out since last year. It had a great Christmas holiday, and unfortunately, the industry right now is not able to capitalize on the situation we're in due to lack of hardware and easy access to hardware. So that's one thing. So that's kind of a self-induced problem. The other a lot of the issues that I hear often are the ability to manage and maintain multiple headsets, especially from the IT department standpoint, and taking care of them, doing updates, managing the software. Mike, you want to chime in on this?
Sure. I agree completely regarding the install base, right? If you look at on the gaming side, we look at 1%, right? If we can get 1% of the install base, we should be okay. But unfortunately, if you look at the only headset that's really given out their numbers, which has been Sony, which is around about 5 million headsets compared to the 107 million PS4s. So one out of 21 people have a PSVR headset. Now, if I take the 1% thing, that's, I think if I do the math correctly, I think that's about 50,000, right? Is that enough to sustain a business, right? If I sold 1% of that, 50,000 units, times that by $30, right? That's some of the MSRP. Is that enough to sustain a business? And a lot of times it's no. And that's assuming that you can get to that 1%. So the install base has been a very big challenge for us with regards to keeping up our business. The other thing that's really been a big challenge has been, do people really want to just put something over their head, right? And has it become part of their behavior? We are a virtual reality company at Servios. we do not have virtual reality meetings. I know it sounds weird, but we would rather stay with Zoom, stay with webinar, go to webinar, stay with, you know, all these other things, but we don't even have virtual reality meeting. It's not part of our you know, the way that we just do business, not part of our behavior. So I think for those two things, I think that has to change. Where again, where the technology actually impacts, you know, regular, you know, a regular business. Like one of the things that we've talked about, you know, when we were prepping and everything is, you know, how instead of us talking to you guys in person, we're doing this webinar. That technology substitutes it, but how do I stop? Like, how do I get to network with people, right? That's just a basic piece of business. Again, that's the way I look at technology is how do you connect basic needs into a behavior and then it becomes adopted.
Just to pick up on what Mike just said there, it's Rafi here. You know, it's interesting that you say you being a VR company and not really embracing the format for conferencing. It does highlight some of the shortcomings of the apps out on the market. Although it seems like every month there are more on the scene. But conversely, I can cite an example from when I was in the immersive entertainment team at NBC Universal. Even though the company is not a VR company, we were an XR division within it. All of our products were built with a multi-user backend, even if the release product was a single user experience. And this really was driven by a necessity on two fronts. You see, collaborating natively in the format is a key part of the creative process that we developed there. So that was one. But the second one is, being a global organization, we had a need to review remotely, right? And it was essential to building the product with global insight because we had distributed teams and management from various parts of the business around the world. And that through that experience, we realized how important it was to always have that as part of the workflow. So I would urge anyone who's looking to create in this space, do scope out the remote collaboration. Obviously, it's key now given our situation with the virus, but even moving beyond that, it's really valuable to understand the medium natively as you work within it.
Rafi, thanks. Earl, I've got a specific question for you from Joe, and he wants to know if you track KPIs for customer activity at different stages in the sales or post-sales process. And are you using VR, AR to engage your distributors, either training them or helping them understand how to sell your products that way?
Yeah, definitely. To answer the question first with the KPIs, we simplified it in terms of, let's say, trade show events, and we really looked at lead generation. So, for example, the year before may have 150 people come to the booth without the VR, and then next year I believe it was up 250 to 257 people. So a really quick one was just how many people you gathered as in terms of leads. Now the follow-up to that is it was a little bit more difficult, and it wasn't tracked as great as we wanted to, meaning even if we got their information at a trade show event, following up on if they purchased a product or not. So that was something that I'm still working on in terms of really tying in the ROI to that. But in terms of our, KPI in general, it was lead generation, how many people we got in, how many people we scanned. In terms of vendors, yes, there is a lot of training involved. And that's part of what I do in terms of my job is translating our business to the vendor I'm working with. So they really have to understand our workflow processes internally, the technology. They don't need to know a lot, but enough to be able to create a VR and AR experience. So I've created some sort of guidelines here and there, but you know, a lot of those are just based off of branding guidelines and UI guidelines from the website, which doesn't translate perfectly, but it is a way of you know, having the vendor understand the business in general.
Great, Earl, thank you. This one is specifically for Terry from Arnie. Terry, how far away is AR technology to be consumer friendly? And he means from using AR in commercial work and being able to have consumers use it without having to download an app or large hurdles to overcome adoption.
A great question. There's two sides of this. There's creation and then the other side is consumption. On the creation side, and actually it's kind of a thing that we need in general, is better rapid prototyping tools. I was talking to my panelists before the webinar about, you know, how we need to be able to take things like Sketch, Figma, you know, and be able to translate those types of design flows into XR, to spatial design. There's really no pipeline for that at all right now, and it's a big problem because there's a very small group of people that know how to do it right. So we need tools to facilitate that rapid prototyping, you know, ideation and learning in an agile way. On the consumption side, the devices are starting to get there. So you know, Nreal Light, $500. You know, you can read text in AR very well. You know, plug it into a phone, plug it into a compute pack, take it with you. It doesn't, I mean, the concern about what it looks like in your head now is irrelevant because you're not outside anyway, but it still looks good. And so you can, you know, have that sort of social, you know, aspects to it. But the use cases on the consumption side are a challenge, the delivery. So, you know, I think WebXR is going to become really important here because ideally an endpoint to an experience is a lot easier for people to deal with than going through the friction of an app store, especially a customized app store that's designed specifically for a device, which is the current flow for people who are using, you know, Oculus Quest, whatever. And unfortunately, those pipelines right now, those app store pipelines, they're not tuned like the mobile app stores are. So, you know, to get a product launched on the Quest store is a 10-week plus process. So what does that do to you? You know, and what does that do to the consumer side of this flow? What we need is, you know, be able to just pop it up. I mean, you can use tools like SideQuests, you know, to do that, but how do you just, it's really a technical flow and not a consumer-friendly flow. So we need to be able to adapt the idea that the internet could be a delivery vehicle, web browsers could be a delivery vehicle for XR experiences. And then that, I think, will be a real killer out of a change in the adoption curve. But I would say that as far as putting a stake in the ground, probably end of the year.
Okay, great. Sorry, just going through a number of questions. This is a good question coming from Tree, and I'm surprised it dropped off so quickly, and maybe Google's decision to drop support for their headset. But can the smartphone VR be relaunched to help build momentum and rebuild the audience? I mean, we started with Gear VR. It was a great, well, it was good for what it was. Anyone want to comment?
People don't want to wear a phone on their head. It's heavy. And what you're going to see is a massive weight reduction in VR headsets soon. So I think that the trend will be to merge ultimately what we see as traditional AR devices or mixed reality glasses like Nreal Light with VR devices, and they're going to ultimately end up being one device that will, you know, eventually get there. It's going to take longer to get to that hybrid size that's comfortable for everybody. But I just don't see. I mean, we saw some interest in quickly using low-cost AR headsets where you can slot a phone in and do it. There's cardboard solution from Horizon. There's Miro. There's a bunch of other. The problem is that fundamentally people just don't want that weight on their forehead.
Right.
Yeah, there's the weight on the forehead, the variety of handsets as well that makes things confusing, but also the drain on your battery is off-putting as a consumer experience, right? So if if it didn't require the phone to do quite so much processing, say it was a cloud served thing, then perhaps it would be easier to adopt. But that's still a way away. So yeah, mobile phone for now, not very appealing.
I've had a lot of comments and questions coming in from people wondering, you know, for discussion about VR, why aren't we doing this in VR? Why are we using GoToWebinar? Why are so many people using Zoom? And I think that, you know, for me, the simple answer, honestly, is if we tried to do that, we might get 10% of the audience today, and we're just not at that critical mass yet where it makes sense to have a majority of the audience presenting in VR XR. I don't know if anyone wants to disagree with that or has a different opinion on it. Terry, I think this question is great for you. What about WebXR and 5G as accelerators for adoption? If so, when do you estimate accessibility for the masses?
Well, as I said, WebXR I think is an important piece and an accelerator for sure. 5G is going to take longer. I mean, the coronavirus is going to have you know, timeline impact globally on the rollout of 5G, unfortunately, because equipment alone is delayed, and that slows everything down. And then, of course, the ability to put people out to build small cells and new towers and to, you know, to install that equipment and to build out the infrastructure. It's just going to take longer than we wanted to. So I see 5G having more of an impact on campus in the short term. We do a lot of work with campus installations in large companies, large enterprise businesses. And I think in terms of business, you know, B2B type of use cases for AR and VR, those high speed, highly reliable 5G campus and network installations are going to really help a lot in the adoption curve in enterprise. But for consumer, it's going to take a little bit longer, partly because of the equipment availability, partly because of the software tooling, as I mentioned earlier. And so it's really not an issue of 5G. I mean, we have 5G in the US. T-Mobile has 200 million customers already on 5G, but the handsets are sparse, right? There's not a lot of people with those devices yet. So it's still, you know, a while before that changeover in equipment is going to occur. And that's going to take at least another year before you see a significant percentage of turnover there.
This is a really great question from Juan. E-commerce and mobile commerce, you know, have transformed retail brick and mortar. We're seeing an impact of that and the result of that today. Do you see VR commerce having the same transformative effect? Personally, I do, but I think we're at least 5 years away from that. Someone want to comment?
Sure. This is Mike. So we, as a gaming, part of the gaming experience has also been, how do I include microtransaction, right? Customers already, they understand that this is part of that gaming behavior. The unfortunate part we haven't figured out, and to Bob's point, we think it's a little time from now, is how do you incite purchases without breaking the immersion? So for us, that's going to be, for us, figuring out the tipping point, as well as getting the infrastructure to support that. And a lot of the platforms from our conversations, they're starting to go down that direction. But again, we still fundamentally, how do you say, hey, I'm going to purchase this cosmetic golden gun while still being part of the horror story that I'm playing right now? And that's been our bigger challenge.
Yeah, in terms of, this is Earl, in terms of augmented reality, it has been a little bit more easier. We've had some AR experiences where you're able to, since it's phone-based or iPad-based, in that case, you know, you're touching on a AR model and it goes to the website. So that has been somewhat successful. The VR side, I've been working on a lot of different models in terms of advertising, putting different things in there. But, you know, as Mike said, it is still difficult in terms of the, you know, where do you send them afterwards? Can they purchase things in there? So that's sort of a challenge that we've been facing also. But the AR side has been a little bit more seamless in terms of at least you're still on an iPad or iPhone.
So I want to be a little cognizant of time. We don't have too many minutes left, but we have a couple more great questions. This one's really good from Antoni. For spatial AR to take off, which do we need first? One, content looking for localized maps to be placed in, or localized large interesting maps made available for developers to place content in?
I would argue that we need real-time mapping solutions, not necessarily the maps themselves. A lot of AR today is still indoors, so we don't need to map the whole world to make lots of tangible use cases work in an indoor context. Retail sales being a good example of that. But I do believe that mapping is a key element in general of building traction for spatial experiences, because until we can translate from these sort of, floors and walls, sort of AR-based anchoring experiences to sort of dynamically using the real world in a more detailed way, it's just not going to. The idea of spatial computing is really hard to explain to somebody. But when I can map complex geometry of surfaces of objects inside of a room, and I can draw on them, and I can attach things directly to the edge of something or the curve of something, they get it. They get the idea that I can merge digital content spatially correctly with real world things and make it interactive and make it meaningful. And so the mapping is the key.
Terry, staying with you for a second, I have Sean asking about the XR Space 5G headset, which I have not heard of. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And is there a developer release date?
I can't say a lot about that other than what's been publicly posted. So we did announce a collaboration with XR Space, but I really can't provide any details on that right now.
Okay, great.
I can just post you to what's been publicly stated.
Earl, any places elsewhere outside of your organization where the company is using or pushing XR?
We're really concentrating on within the company right now. Again, the training aspect has been the biggest push. The marketing side, it'll be interesting to see how, for example, my use case was primarily trade shows and events, how that may evolve in the future. It could be working more in the AR side just for that purposes. If the trade shows and events aren't happening, we'll have to look at different situations with that. So in terms of the company, it's really focusing on the training and education at this point.
Earl, staying with you for a second, Amar wants to know, and if you're able to share, how much did it cost to create your AR VR experience for your booth?
Well, so with that, it was within the trade show company. And in terms of VR, sometimes if we have a small booth, it was simple as putting a laptop down there and having the headset there. So the cost was very minimal. It was basically the hardware, and the booth setups we had were very simple. It was basically, in some cases, if we have a 10-foot by 10-foot booth, a table, a desk, or a table and a chair, and that's pretty much it. So you can do it very inexpensively, but the gear in terms of having the headset, and we did have a laptop, Alienware computer, and stuff like that. So in terms of exhibiting, you can do it at a cheaper price.
Great. So with just 2 minutes left, I want to close with John's question, and he wants to can you venture a guess as to when everyone will just get it? Are we talking 2021, 2025, 2030? I think personally, I think with us now almost in the middle of 2020, and let's say just two mass consumer headsets on the market, PSVR and Oculus Quest, I think we're in a 2022, 2023 range. Earl?
Yeah, I would agree. I think as Terry was saying earlier, just about the headsets getting smaller and easier to use and different things like that. I think that it'll take a little bit more time. So yeah, 2 to 5 years maybe.
Mike?
I think 3 to 5, which is extending Earl's estimate by a year.
Rafi?
I would say consumer mass adoption 5 years, but enterprise use, it's happening right now in real time, pardon the pun.
So Rafi, just on that, is the biggest impediment for adoption lack of available hardware or cost-effective hardware?
Depends on the audience. For consumers, definitely, but for enterprises, no. The automotive industry has been using VR arcades for 20 plus years and have no problem paying, the top end prices for VR headsets because it's key to their workflow and it has been for the last 5-6 years. So it depends on the organization and the use.
Got it. Terry, you get the last word.
I think assuming manufacturing production accelerates back up in time, that Q1 2021 will see real amazing numbers year over year on VR headsets, consumer use. I think consumer AR is probably Q2 2022 right now. I'm going to be specific, and I'm also probably more optimistic than most.
Well, I want to thank you all for joining me. It's been a great conversation, really quick hour. Great questions from the audience. And hand it back to Stefan.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for taking the reins on that one. Really interesting discussion. As usual, the hour absolutely flew by. So I'll thank you again, and of course thank all the panelists, El, Mike, Rafi, and Terry. Really great contributions, and thank, of course, the listeners for tuning in. Just a quick reminder that I'll be sending out the recording for this webinar tomorrow or Monday, so keep an eye out for that. And yeah, hope you all stay safe and healthy, and until next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye.